Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a concept that's really captivated humanity for millennia. The idea of a perfect society.
Yeah, that dream.
Exactly. Imagine a place where, everything just aligns, where conflict is absent, and every single individual finds absolute fulfillment. This vision, we often call it utopia, it really speaks to a fundamental human yearning.
It absolutely does.
But what if this pursuit of perfection holds a kind of hidden paradox? What if the very quest for utopia, this ideal society, actually contains the seeds of its own destruction, maybe even leading to its exact opposite? It's a thought that, once you really consider it, it sort of reshapes how you look at our aspirations and, well, our challenges.
What's truly fascinating about this topic, I think, is that enduring human impulse to envision and sometimes even attempt to create utopia,
Right.
but then you set that against the historical reality that these dreams, while they often face immense challenges, sometimes they even lead to really dangerous outcomes.
Yeah.
This tension, between the ideal and the actual, it's played out across centuries, from the earliest philosophical ponderings in ancient Greece to ambitious communal experiments in more recent history.
Too much history there.
Definitely. Our deep dive today will explore this rich history of thought and action. We want to understand why utopia literally means no place, and whether that etymological twist is a limitation, maybe a profound cautionary tale, or perhaps a crucial insight into how we might approach our future.
And we've assembled a really diverse and, I think, thought-provoking stack of sources for this deep dive. We'll be drawing from some fascinating discussions we found in Reddit's philosophy threads.
Always interesting.
Yeah. A comprehensive overview from Wikipedia, which is great for grounding us. An in-depth economic analysis of a specific American utopian experiment from EconLib.
That one's key.
Definitely. A profound analytical essay on utopianism by Irving Kristol, published in Imprimis, and also a modern perspective on why utopian thinking might actually be more vital than ever from Psyche Ideas.
A good mix.
Yeah, our mission here is really to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from all these sources, helping you become truly well-informed on this captivating and honestly surprisingly relevant topic.
So where do we start?
Let's start right at the very beginning. With the word itself. The word utopia gets tossed around quite a bit today, right? Often just to dismiss an idea as unrealistic or, fanciful.
Oh, that's just utopian.
Yeah, exactly. But its origins hold a much deeper, more complex meaning. Where did this term actually come from, and what was its original intent?
Okay, so the term utopia, as our sources confirm, was first coined by the English scholar, lawyer, statesman Sir Thomas More back in 1516.
Right, for his book.
For his book, Utopia. And what's really ingenious about More's choice of word is its etymological playfulness. It's a clever fusion of ancient Greek words that carries this double meaning right from the get-go.
Okay.
So on one hand, you have ou, which translates to not, combined with topos, meaning place.
Not place.
Literally no place, which immediately hints at this inherent unreachability, right? A place that exists only in the imagination, or maybe a place that cannot exist.
So it's not just a perfect place. It's fundamentally an impossible place, a non-existent one. That's a pretty powerful linguistic starting point.
Exactly. But here's the really clever twist. There's a homophonic parallel with the Greek prefix eu, which means good or well.
Like euphoria.
Precisely. So utopia would literally mean a good place. More intentionally created this linguistic duality. He made the word simultaneously suggest a good place and no place.
Wow.
Which sets up the central paradox of utopia right from its birth, really. It implies that while we might conceive of a perfect society, its very perfection might render it inherently unattainable. Or maybe that the ideal can only ever exist in the realm of imagination, a mental construct rather than a physical reality.
That dual meaning truly frames the entire conversation around utopia, doesn't it? It's an imagined perfection, but one that is also inherently elusive. So while its etymology points to impossibility, in common usage today, the term has shifted, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
When we talk about a utopia now, we're generally describing a non-existent society that is intended to be, considerably better than contemporary society, one possessing highly desirable or near-perfect qualities for its members.
Right. That's the common understanding.
It's this vision of imagined perfection that continues to capture our attention and fuel our aspirations, whether we believe it's achievable or not.
And this leads us directly to the central paradox we really need to unpack. If a utopian society, by its very definition, means All matters of quality of life and happiness are fulfilled by every member within said society to the fullest extent.
Which sounds great.
Sounds amazing, but how can that possibly work when humans are, well, by their very nature, non-homogeneous?
Right. We're all different.
We are, and always have been, a diverse species. We have an incredible range of conflicting desires, beliefs, values, aspirations. You name it.
That's where those Reddit discussions we looked at really hit home. They highlight this core problem beautifully. The attempt to fulfill everyone's desires would inevitably, inescapably, come at the expense of someone else's.
It has to, doesn't it?
Yeah. Imagine trying to design a single society that perfectly accommodates, say, deeply held religious beliefs that might conflict with certain societal norms, alongside a fundamental human desire to maybe challenge the status quo, or even just individual preferences for lifestyle or work-life balance or personal expression.
It's impossible.
If a utopia demands uniformity of happiness, it implicitly requires quelling or suppressing these diverse desires. But as, many of us would agree, sacrificing individual freedoms and liberties, the very markers of a prosperous and desirable society for many, that would transform that good place into something, well, far less appealing.
And Lyman Tower Sargent, a scholar cited in our sources, he explicitly argues this. He says the nature of utopia is inherently contradictory precisely because societies are not homogeneous and have desires which conflict and therefore cannot simultaneously be satisfied.
That nails it.
Yeah. He drives this point home by illustrating the vast spectrum of utopias imagined throughout history. Socialist, capitalist, feminist, racist.
Wow, even racist.
Oh, yeah. Free love, nuclear family, gay, lesbian, and many, many more. The sheer diversity and often the mutually exclusive nature of these visions inherently underscores the challenge.
You can't have it all at once.
Exactly. You can't have a free love utopia and a staunchly traditional nuclear family utopia simultaneously satisfied by every single member in the same society without some form of coercion or exclusion. The very act of choosing one ideal necessitates the suppression or marginalization of another. It's like trying to perfectly fit together puzzle pieces from a dozen different puzzles, right? Each with its own unique picture of perfection.
That's a powerful image. It really drives home the impossibility of a one-size-fits-all perfect society when human desires are just so varied.
Indeed. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where those long-standing arguments against sweeping large-scale systems like communism or, say, certain forms of anarchism often emerge.
Practicalities.
The theoretical idea of statelessness or classlessness, while it might sound appealing in its ideal form, often runs headlong into the natural human inclination for some individuals to lead or organize or innovate or even just accumulate resources.
Ambition, drive.
Exactly. But if you then try to prevent that, if you impose mechanisms to suppress that natural human drive for agency or ambition, you're imposing control on those who wish not to be controlled. You're creating the very constraint a utopia is meant to overcome.
So the solution creates the problem.
It suggests that the relentless pursuit of a single perfect society could, paradoxically, actually lead to a world we wouldn't want to live in, because it becomes defined by what it suppresses rather than what it enables. It sacrifices individual flourishing for an abstract, potentially unachievable collective ideal.
This aspiration for perfection, though, this striving for an ideal society, it's certainly not a new concept.
Yeah.
We mentioned ancient Greece and Rome. Proto-utopian ideas, these early sort of glimmerings of a better world, they actually date way back.
Yeah.
Humans have been pondering this concept for a very long time, long before the word utopia itself was even coined.
Absolutely.
So where did these philosophical roots begin to take, concrete shape?
Well, when we delve into the philosophical foundations, Plato's Republic, written in ancient Greece around 380 BCE, is widely considered the first recorded major utopian proposal.
The big one.
The big one. Plato envisioned this highly structured society. He laid out rigid class systems based on an individual's innate virtues. Golden citizens, who are the rulers or philosopher kings. Silver citizens, the warriors or guardians, and then bronze and iron citizens, the producers and laborers.
A strict hierarchy.
Very strict. And the philosopher kings, this carefully selected and rigorously trained elite, they would rule. After 50 years, 50 of intense education and preparation in philosophy and governance, they would supposedly govern with such wisdom that poverty and deprivation would be eliminated through fair resource distribution.
50 years.
His republic also prescribed a system with very few laws and no lawyers. He believed that wise, virtuous governance would basically negate the need for extensive legal codes, as citizens would inherently understand and adhere to justice.
That's optimistic.
Yeah. Interestingly, it even suggested hiring mercenaries from warlike neighbors to keep the peace. The idea was to effectively weed out aggressive populations by directing their belligerents outwards. A rather pragmatic and stark solution, you could say.
Definitely stark. So Plato's vision was really about creating perfect governance to ensure a perfect society, maybe less about universal individual freedom.
Yeah.
Then, centuries later, we have Sir Thomas More's 16th century Utopia itself, the book that gave the concept its name.
Yep.
It's fascinating how ambiguous his intentions seem to have been with this work. While some readers, particularly, the utopian socialists of later centuries, took it as a literal blueprint for a better society.
Right. They ran with it.
Others view it as a brilliant work of satire. It's widely believed. Moore intended it more to reveal the flaws and injustices of England in his time, a critique disguised as a distant ideal, rather than to offer a realistic, achievable, perfect society.
Exactly.
This ambiguity perfectly circles back to that no place versus good place etymology we talked about earlier. Was it a vision or was it a biting critique wrapped in a fictional travelogue?
And what's particularly insightful here is how Irving Kristol in his essay articulates this crucial difference between classical utopianism, think Plato and Moore, and its modern iteration.
Okay, what's the difference?
For Plato and Moore, constructing a utopia was fundamentally a useful act of the philosophical imagination. It was an elevating affair that produced better political philosophers because it allowed them to contemplate what a truly just and ordered society might look like.
So, a thought experiment.
Pretty much. It provided a lens to critique their own imperfect realities. It wasn't necessarily about producing better politics in the immediate practical sense. It existed in words, not in deeds. It was an intellectual exercise, providing perspective on societal limitations, but it was ultimately academic. Prudence, practical wisdom in the real world of politics that was seen as the supreme virtue for philosophers.
So the classical approach was more about understanding the ideal to better navigate and maybe improve the imperfect reality, rather than trying to manifest the ideal directly onto the world. The dream informed the reality, but didn't demand to replace it wholesale.
Precisely. Moore, for instance, served King Henry VIII not with the expectation of realizing his utopian vision in England.
Probably wise.
Right. But rather to minimize the evils in the world as it was. Kristol notes that Moore wasn't surprised by his eventual failure to achieve radical reform, nor was he cynical about the very idea of striving for good. This highlights a crucial classical distinction. The dream and the reality were separate, yet both authentically human endeavors. The dream provided a critical perspective, a guiding star, but it didn't insist on becoming a literal blueprint for immediate, total societal transformation.
That's a really significant distinction. It suggests a more pragmatic, maybe grounded approach to idealism. So if that was the classical view, what changed after Moore? What propelled us into what Kristol calls modern utopianism? It sounds like a fundamental shift in how we perceived and pursued these ideals.
Indeed, a massive shift. The modern era, according to Kristol, sees a profound mutation of the human spirit. Utopias cease to be merely philosophical exercises or academic thought experiments.
They become real projects.
They become ideals to be realized in deed and not merely in words. This is a monumental shift. No longer is calling someone utopian necessarily an accusation of madness or irrelevance. It just implies they're maybe unduly optimistic about the timeline required to achieve the ideal, not that the ideal itself is inherently impossible to achieve.
So the goal itself is seen as possible, just hard.
Exactly. This new perspective, Kristol argues, risks confusing philosophical dreams with the substantial actualities of human existence. And that has potentially disastrous consequences because it fuels an impatience with imperfection, a desire to force reality to conform to the abstract ideal.
That's where it gets really compelling. Kristol identifies three key intellectual trends that contributed to this profound shift, this mutation of the human spirit, transforming utopia from a contemplative act into a tangible blueprint for action, an ideology to be implemented.
Right. First, he points to millenarianism. This is an intrinsic aspect of the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? A belief in history having a distinct beginning, middle, and a divinely ordained, perfected end state. A golden age or messianic era.
History going somewhere specific.
Exactly. This prophetic element became intellectually and popularly dominant over the classical, cyclical view of history, while religious authorities traditionally tried to contain those who attempted to, hasten the end.
Force God's hand, so to speak.
Yeah. The fragmentation of religious authority after the 16th century Reformation allowed these millennial expectations to kind of overflow into secular thought. People became convinced they could, through human effort, accelerate the arrival of this perfect age, moving beyond passive expectation to active intervention.
Okay.
This gave utopian projects a sense of historical inevitability, maybe even a secular divine mandate, pushing for radical, immediate change.
So the idea that history isn't just an endless cycle, but a linear progression towards a specific, perfect culmination that we can actually influence, that's a powerful and, potentially dangerous idea if taken to an extreme.
Absolutely. The second trend is rationalism. This emerged also in the 16th century alongside the scientific revolution. This was the conviction that reality could be fully comprehended and mastered by man's abstract reason.
Reason is king.
Pretty much. Therefore, any existing institution, custom, or social order needed to be legitimized solely by reason, not by tradition, historical accident, or organic growth. This was a radical utopian mode of thought because it implicitly declared all existing social orders, which were often built on centuries of accumulated tradition and practical wisdom, even if not fully understood rationally, as inherently flawed if they couldn't be justified by pure abstract reason.
So if it wasn't logically perfect on paper, it had to go.
Essentially. Modern conservatism, according to Crystal, emerged precisely to challenge this, arguing that institutions endure and provide stability because of an inherent collective wisdom, often tested and proven over generations, even if we don't fully understand their why from a purely abstract, rational perspective. Rationalism, then, fostered the belief that a perfectly rational society could be designed entirely from scratch.
So reason became a tool not just for understanding the world, but for systematically remaking it from first principles, based on what was theoretically ideal, rather than what had practically evolved over time.
Precisely. And the third, and perhaps most impactful trend, is scientism and modern technology. Crystal argues that neither millenarianism nor rationalism could have sustained the utopian temper alone. They provided the will and the method, but technology provided the plausibility.
The how.
The how, exactly. Technology, unlike philosophical ideals, is tangible. It works. And because it works so demonstrably, it gave plausibility to the notion that modern man is uniquely in the position of being able to convert his idealized dreams into tangible reality.
We can build anything.
That was the feeling. It suggested that human history itself can be defined as progressive, leading us from an imperfect human condition to a perfected one where science and engineering could solve all problems. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, written in the early 17th century, is often presented as the first truly modern utopia.
Right, we mentioned that.
It envisioned a society governed by scientists and technologists applying the scientific method to societal improvement. A future Bacon believed could easily exist, in fact, and which he proposed as a very possible and completely desirable future. This stood in stark contrast to earlier views. The ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Christians often saw a kind of diabolical aspect to technology, doubting men would use it wisely.
Interesting.
But modern technology emerged in this context of almost unbounded optimism, fueling the belief that nothing was beyond human reach if only we applied enough ingenuity and scientific rigor.
So these three forces, millenarianism giving the sense of destiny, rationalism giving the method, and technology giving the means combined to shift utopia from a philosophical exercise to an actionable project. It makes perfect sense then that people wouldn't just write about these perfect societies, but would actually try to build them.
Exactly.
The urge to create a perfect place has taken root in some really surprising ways throughout history. Let's look at some of these real-world attempts that put these theories to the test.
Yeah, let's get practical. Our sources detail many examples of intentional communities, especially prevalent in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly in the United States and Europe. These were often driven by radical religious groups seeking to manifest their faith in all aspects of daily life.
Like the Shakers.
Like the Shakers, exactly. A celibate communal society, originated in England, came to America in 1774, established thriving communities focused on communal property, simple living, and that famous ecstatic worship. Other European groups came to the U.S. seeking religious freedom and the chance to build their version of heaven on earth. Groups like the Society of the Woman in the Wilderness, the Ephrata Cloister, and the Harmony Society.
The Harmony Society. That name sounds familiar.
It should. They were a Christian theosophy and pietist group founded by George Rapp, and they lasted over 100 years, from 1785 to 1905. That makes them one of the longest-running financially successful communes in American history.
Wow, over a century. That's impressive.
It really is. Then there was the Oneida community, founded in 1848 by John Humphrey Noyes. They also lasted over 30 years as a religious commune, famous for their complex marriage system, before eventually transitioning into a joint stock company. You probably know them today for their silverware.
Oneida silverware. Right, had no idea it started as a commune.
Yeah. And even the Amish and Hutterites, with their distinct faith-based communal lifestyles, you can see them as ongoing attempts towards a kind of religious utopia. It demonstrates that a shared, deeply held belief system can be a powerful glue for sustained communal living.
That's a really long lifespan for some of these communities, especially compared to others you might hear about. Now let's unpack a particularly striking case study. Robert Owen's New Harmony in Indiana, established in 1825.
Ah, yes, Owen.
What makes this so compelling is that it was a secular attempt at utopia, which really sets it apart from many of those successful religious communities. And interestingly, it was built on land previously owned by a religious utopian community, the Harmonists or Rappites, the very group we just mentioned.
The successful ones.
Exactly. They had thrived there for 10 prosperous years, striving for a temporal perfection with a strong drive to live in a Christian community. Owen bought their flourishing land for $150,000, explicitly aiming for a secular paradise on earth, a direct contrast to the spiritual vision that had already proved successful right there.
Owen himself was a truly fascinating figure, quite admirable in many ways. He was a successful industrialist back in New Lanark, Scotland, really known for genuinely progressive practices that were way ahead of his time.
What kind of things?
While at his mills there, he provided housing and education for workers and their families. He banned corporal punishment in his schools and famously refused to hire child labor under 10. He was, as our source describes him, a hard-headed businessman who successfully put his progressive principles into practice on a smaller, more contained scale. He showed that humane treatment could actually be economically viable, even beneficial for productivity.
So he had a track record.
He did. At New Harmony, he sought to extend these principles on a much grander scale. He envisioned these highly planned communities of about 2,000 people. Based on deistic religion, that belief in an impersonal creator God who doesn't actively interfere, along with reason, rationality, the abolition of private property, and less emphasis on the traditional nuclear family.
Big ideas.
Huge ideas. And his ideals attracted many talented and visionary individuals, including pioneering natural scientists. Owen's own sons were incredibly prolific and went on to significant achievements. For example, his oldest son, Robert Dale Owen, published the first argument for birth control in America and, as a member of Congress, introduced the bill that established the Smithsonian institutions.
Wow. From New Harmony to the Smithsonian.
Yeah. New Harmony even boasted the first co-ed public school in the U.S. and one of the nation's first trade schools. Governance was intended to be a town council of 7, though Owen maintained ultimate control through appointed members. They tried various constitutions, attempting to strike a balance, allowing private property for personal belongings, but communal rights for other assets.
Okay, so here was a project with brilliant minds, robust idealism, significant financial resources, and visionary leadership. You'd think it would be a resounding success, right?
Yeah, it absolutely would.
But what in the world went wrong? This is where it gets really telling, I think. New Harmony failed dramatically after just 2 years.
2 years after all that.
The sources point to several critical issues that really resonate with that paradox we discussed earlier. First and foremost, there was a lack of production incentives.
The economics.
Exactly. Owen's lofty vision, quote, obscured the hard reality that reallocating wealth and subsidizing production are quite different from motivating the creation of new wealth. There was simply too little production and disagreement about inequities that quickly led to internal strife. If people aren't motivated to produce and contribute, the wealth you're trying to reallocate just disappears, no matter how ideal the system looks on paper.
Another significant problem was Owen's lack of sustained leadership presence. While he was an eloquent visionary, a superb brand ambassador for his ideas, he addressed the U.S. Congress, 5 presidents, promoting his grand vision.
Big stage stuff.
Right. But he didn't actually spend much time at New Harmony itself. He was often away recruiting new residents, seeking more capital, leaving the actual day-to-day operation to flounder without sufficient active leadership on the ground. The effort just kind of foundered without the necessary guidance and accountability that even the most idealistic community needs.
And crucially, the heterogeneous population Owen attracted proved to be a major hurdle. This directly reflects that challenge of human non-homogeneity we talked about.
The mix of people.
His open invitation cast a really wide net. It brought in what one of his sons later described as a heterogeneous collection of radicals, enthusiastic devotees to principle, honest latitudinarians, and lazy theorists, with a sprinkling of unprincipled sharpers thrown in.
Lazy theorists and unprincipled sharpers. Ouch.
Yeah. Latitudinarians here refers to individuals who are maybe broad-minded or tolerant in their views, perhaps not strictly adhering to the communal rules or the level of commitment Owen anticipated. This mix meant that while some were genuinely committed to the communal ideal and diligently contributed, others were simply free riders who took advantage of the system.
The classic problem.
Exactly. It led to widespread resentment from the diligent towards those who weren't pulling their weight. The fundamental assumption that everyone would just be intrinsically motivated to contribute equally, regardless of individual inclination or immediate personal benefit, that proved fatally flawed.
Benjamin Rogers' 3 morality tales detailed in one of our sources, they perfectly emphasize this contrast and extract a powerful economic lesson. He highlights that the original Harmony settlement, run by the Harmonists, the Rappites,
The religious group.
right, they were prosperous for a decade. It demonstrated the viability of a smaller, more homogeneous, and crucially, religiously motivated community. Owen's New Harmony, despite his genius and wealth, was a social and financial disaster in just 2 years. Raj concluded that Owen's voluntary, compassionate business practices back at New Lanark, Scotland, where he treated his workers humanely within a market framework, were far more effective and sustainable than his large-scale communal living experiments based on abolishing private property.
So the real-world business worked better than the utopian commune.
That was Raj's takeaway. And this contrast between the Harmonist success and Owen's failure leads to a broader point about the challenges of large-scale communal ownership or centrally planned economic systems. The source argues that advocating for such systems, particularly on a large scale, requires a kind of faith in government, faith regarding its perfect knowledge, its ability to provide the right incentives, and its inherent morality.
A lot of faith.
A lot. Government activity, by its very nature, is often coercive and non-local. And the source suggests this exacerbates knowledge and incentive problems like the free rider issue compared to purely voluntary small-scale communal efforts. In a small local setting, it's easier to discern true need, monitor behavior, build trust, making fraud and long-term dependency less likely.
You know who's doing what.
Exactly. The example of Ananias and Sapphira in the early church is even used to illustrate these enduring incentive problems. Even in a highly motivated religious community that voluntarily pooled resources, the temptation to lie about the full proceeds of their property sale, for personal gain, it still existed. This suggests that even deep spiritual conviction can be tested by economic disincentives or the absence of clear personal accountability.
So while the early church's communal sharing might have worked because it was voluntary, localized, and driven by immense internal motivation, trying to scale that up to a national coercive system introduces all these complex human nature and economic issues that are just incredibly difficult to overcome. The ideal hits the wall of reality.
Exactly. And one source, in a critique of modern interpretations of socialism, suggests that many contemporary advocates aren't actually referring to the traditional definition government ownership of the means of production, which is what New Harmony grappled with.
What are they talking about then?
Instead, they might envision watered-down versions that, while perhaps well-intentioned, are argued to be fraught with inefficiencies, inequities, and a mix of good intentions, cronyism, and ignorance of economics. The key takeaway from these historical experiments seems to be that while the ideals of a perfect society might look appealing on paper, they often fail in practice because they don't adequately account for human incentives, the complexities of large-scale organization, and that inherent diversity of human desire.
This deep dive into the economic and political models of utopia really reveals the fundamental challenges they face when confronted with, well, us, human nature. But utopia isn't solely defined by how we organize our economies or governments, is it?
Not at all.
It also encompasses wildly imaginative ways of envisioning human existence itself, going far beyond purely economic or political systems. Our sources reveal a rich tapestry of these diverse visions.
Indeed. We can categorize these into several fascinating varieties. First, we have technological utopias. These range from Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, which we mentioned earlier, that vision of a society governed by
Like
scientists,
science utopia.
to much more futuristic concepts where advanced technology might eliminate suffering, death, even fundamentally change human nature itself. Star Trek is often cited as a powerful cultural example where technology enhances human living rather than dominating it. It enables a post-scarcity economy where humans are freed to focus on self-improvement, exploration, intellectual pursuits.
Makes sense.
Libertarian transhumanists even propose extropia, an open, evolving society that actively uses technology to transcend current human limitations, striving for ever-increasing intelligence, longevity, well-being. Nick Bostrom's Deep Utopia further explores a hypothetical solved world achieved through machine superintelligence, where technologies like advanced cognitive enhancement, reversal of aging, precise control of mood, all become physically possible.
Sounds intense.
It does. And of course, the classic counterpoint to this technological optimism is the techno-dystopias we see in works like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World or George Orwell's 1984, where technology is wielded as a tool for control, surveillance, and the suppression of individuality.
Then there are ecological utopias. These focus on new ways societies relate to nature. They often advocate for sustainability, drawing a stark contrast between modern destructive environmental practices and more traditional, maybe harmonious ways of living. They envision societies deeply integrated with their natural surroundings.
Like Callenbach's book.
Exactly. Ernest Callenbach's Ecotopia from 1975 is a key example. It imagines a breakaway society in the Pacific Northwest that prioritizes ecological balance, sustainable living, and small-scale, community-oriented solutions. This work has significantly influenced green politics and environmental movements, offering a detailed blueprint, really, for how a society might live in genuine harmony with the planet.
Next, we explore feminist utopias. These works delve into the complexities of gender, seeing it as both a social construct and maybe a biological imperative, or some mix. Some propose societies based on complete equality between sexes, like Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward from 1888, which for its time was quite progressive in incorporating women's equality into its utopian structure, although often within separate spheres of activity.
Right.
Others imagine complete separatism, as powerfully seen in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's Herland from 1915. There, an all-female society thrives in isolation, completely free from patriarchal structures, exploring new forms of community, education, social organization.
A whole different world.
Completely. Science fiction pushes these ideas even further, with concepts like birth-giving shifted entirely to machines, or gender becoming age-dependent, as in Elizabeth Mann Borghesi's My Own Utopia. Wonder Woman's Paradise Island, The Misra, is also a well-known cultural example of a matriarchal, all-female community. These narratives often serve as thought experiments, exploring female independence, freedom from traditional gender roles, and the potential for new societal structures based on alternative values.
And finally, even urban design utopias.
Hmm.
The very planning of our cities has a utopian dimension, doesn't it? A desire to create perfect living environments.
Definitely. Examples include Walter Elias Disney's original EP-site concept, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow.
Not the theme park.
Not the theme park we know today. His original vision was for a constantly evolving city where new urban planning ideas would be tested in real time, aiming for maximum efficiency and quality of life. Then there's Paolo Soleri's visionary Arcosanti in Arizona, an experimental arcology architecture plus ecology designed to demonstrate compact, self-sufficient urban living with minimal environmental impact.
Still going, I think.
It is. And more recently, we see ambitious projects like Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Neom, a planned smart city aiming to be a futuristic, zero-carbon metropolis.
Right, the line.
Exactly. Irving Kristol, back in his essay, points out a fascinating detail about many of these planned cities. Cemeteries are often notably missing from their blueprints.
Huh, never thought of that.
This, he argues, suggests an inherent utopian desire to bring history to a stop at a particular moment of perfection, effectively avoiding the messy reality of death, decay, and constant change. It's a desire for a static, perpetually ideal state, rather than one that acknowledges and evolves naturally with the cycles of life.
Okay, so in our current world, which feels pretty marked by political polarization, global crises, a pervasive sense of pessimism maybe, The very mention of utopia often elicits, well, dismissal, even laughter sometimes.
Yeah, eye-rolling.
It's become shorthand for lack of realism or an impossible pipe dream. If you propose a truly transformative idea, someone will inevitably label it utopian just to shut down the conversation. You might be wondering, have we simply given up on the idea of radical betterment altogether? Has the concept lost its power?
The sources definitely acknowledge this widespread skepticism. They point directly to the dark past of prominent utopian pursuits. Consider the grand but deeply flawed narratives of, say, Marxist Russia under Stalin or Nazi Germany under Hitler.
Heavy examples.
Very. Both, despite their diametrically opposed ideologies, shared this desire for the perfectibility of society, attempting to impose an absolute ideal. Tragically, this pursuit led to totalitarian, absolutist methods and immense human cost. This historical trauma has left a rotten taste in the collective consciousness, fostering a deep fear that utopian striving inherently tends towards dangerous absolutism, suppressing dissent, crushing individuality in the name of some collective good.
Makes sense why people are wary.
It's no wonder that dystopia, its antonymic sibling, has found a much more comfortable seat in modern discourse. Works like Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, or even the popular Hunger Games series. They resonate deeply because they reflect our anxieties about oppressive systems and loss of freedom. It makes us much more comfortable contemplating what could go wrong than what could go perfectly right.
It's true, we seem much more fluent in the language of dystopia than utopia these days. But here's where the conversation gets really interesting, I think. Some scholars argue that now, more than ever, we actually need to revitalize utopian thinking in politics.
Revitalize it. How?
Not as a flawed ideological project that seeks to impose a single, static, perfect world, but as a dynamic strategy or maybe a toolkit for positive change. It's about redefining what utopia can be for us today, moving beyond the historical baggage.
Okay, that's intriguing. So utopia as a method, not a destination.
Nothing like that.
This redefinition emphasizes utopia as a praxis that is simultaneously critical, imaginative, and crucially reflexive. Praxis here means action informed by theory, right? A continuous cycle of thinking and doing. It's about how utopian thinking offers a radical new way of thinking about political engagement, especially valuable in dark and cynical times when transformative change seems impossible.
A way to break out of negativity.
Exactly. One key contribution of this revitalized approach is its ability to reimagine how life can be bettered at a very grassroots level by people and for people. The sources give compelling examples, things like universal childcare and free public education.
Things we take for granted now some places.
Right. But they were once considered flights of utopianism or impossible dreams by many. They are now everyday realities in many parts of the world. This illustrates how utopian thinking can be the vital first step, setting a bold vision towards real, tangible change. Henri de Saint-Simon, an early 19th century utopian socialist, had an idea that resonates here. He believed the future golden age wouldn't just happen, it would be built by man's own efforts, highlighting our fundamental human capacity for transformation and construction.
So it's less about a fixed destination and more about a process, a way of thinking that keeps us moving forward. What does this all mean for you then, listening to this? How could you apply this seemingly abstract concept to your own thinking and engagement with the world? The scholar Fatima Vieira breaks down this revitalized utopian thinking into 4 powerful modes. She offers what she calls a toolkit for approaching the future with both vision and grounded reality.
Okay, a toolkit sounds useful. What are the modes?
First, there's perspective thinking. This means defining a utopian horizon.
A horizon, like something you aim for but might not reach?
Exactly. It's not about a fixed, achievable destination you'll necessarily land on, but rather an imaginative, desirable height that invigorates the very act of thinking about a better future. It's like a distant lighthouse that guides your course, providing direction and purpose, even if you never reach its exact location. It prevents despair by always offering a better possibility out there.
Second, critical thinking. Far from being unrealistic or escapist, this mode demands a frank interrogation of the present.
Facing facts.
Right. It requires confronting reality head-on, acknowledging its flaws, injustices, limitations, and using that clear-eyed understanding to fuel the desire for improvement. It's the essential reality check that grounds utopian aspirations, keeps them from flying off into pure fantasy.
Third, holistic thinking. This recognizes that society is an interconnected whole, a complex web of relationships and systems.
Everything affects everything else.
Pretty much. Therefore, Any incremental actions or proposed changes must consider their consequences on the entirety of society, ensuring that addressing one problem doesn't inadvertently create another one somewhere else. It encourages looking at the ripple effects, fostering a sense of systemic understanding rather than just fragmented problem solving.
And finally, creative thinking.
Yeah.
This is about keeping alive the what-if possibilities for the future.
The dreaming part.
Yeah. It's about allowing imagination to boldly enter political and social discussions, daring to envision alternatives that break free from conventional limitations and current paradigms. This is where truly transformative ideas that might seem completely impossible today, can emerge and eventually gain traction.
So perspective, critical, holistic, creative. That's a powerful set of tools.
Ultimately, utopianism in this redefined sense encourages a dimension of radical hope in modern politics. In a world often dominated by despair, a focus on what's being lost, a sense that meaningful change is impossible, it offers resistance to a politics that makes the possibility of transformation appear closed off.
Hope is resistance. I like that.
Rebecca Solnit's quote is particularly powerful here. Violence is the power of the state, imagination and nonviolence the power of civil society. This hope is often iterated and kept alive not just in political discourse, but profoundly in art, music, film, literature.
Right, culture plays a huge role.
Think about Afrofuturism, for example. With works like Marvel's Black Panther or the visionary music of Janelle Monáe, they set a powerful utopian horizon. They battle historical and contemporary racism and oppression, not just by critiquing the present, but by imagining radically better, technologically advanced, and socially just futures for Black people, offering both critique and profound hope for what could be.
That's a great example.
Philosopher Slavoj Žižek adds a compelling perspective, too. He says true utopia isn't just a pleasant fantasy. It emerges from an innermost urgency when situations are truly without obvious solutions. You are forced to imagine it. It is the only way out.
Necessity breeds utopia.
In a way. And Richard Stahlhold beautifully describes it as an ideal somewhere beyond the horizon, a lighthouse to which it may seek to approach, providing direction and purpose even if never fully reached.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. We've explored how utopia is simultaneously an imagined community with highly desirable qualities, and at its etymological root, no place at all. We've delved into its deep philosophical roots, from Plato to More, examined the mix and often cautionary results of real-world attempts like New Harmony, and really grappled with the enduring paradoxes it presents when confronted with the inherent non-homogeneity and complex incentives of human nature.
So perhaps the true power of utopian thinking isn't really in believing we can achieve a static, perfect world, frozen in time and free from all imperfection. That seems like the trap.
Yeah, that seems unlikely and maybe undesirable.
Instead, maybe it lies in using it as a dynamic toolkit for positive change, a way to continuously push the boundaries of what's possible. As Irving Kristol so eloquently put it, the real antidote to utopianism is a self-conscious understanding of utopianism.
Know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. It's about making that crucial distinction between dream and reality, allowing both the legitimacy of the dream to inspire us and the integrity of reality to ground us and direct our efforts effectively.
Balancing the ideal and the real?
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Can you, in your own life, in your communities, use these modes of perspective, critical, holistic, and creative thinking? Can you use them to build small, good places, little pockets of improvement and innovation, and continue the vital human work of envisioning a better horizon without succumbing to the traps of an unattainable, absolutist perfection?
The big question.
It's a challenging thought for sure, but perhaps one that offers the most meaningful and sustainable path forward in a complex world, something to really chew on.